Majority Leader Reid is anxiously awaiting the CBO estimate on his Senate health care bill as to how much it costs. But you shouldn't be waiting, because even though you paid for the CBO estimate of the cost, you will be the last to see it. We spoke to Senator Gregg about what's going on with the health care bill. Senator, nice to see you.
Oh, thank you, Greta. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. Senator, since the last time we spoke, have you thought about whether or not you thought that a health care reform bill is going to get passed by the end of the year?
By the end of the year, I don't think they can do it by the end of the year. But, you know, they've got supermajorities here in the Senate and the House, so then logically you have to presume that they're going to be able to pass something, and the President's invested his whole, basically, domestic political agenda on this issue. So you have to presume they'll be able to pass something, and I'm afraid it's going to be a large bill. It's going to spend a lot of money we don't have, drive up our debt, and make it very difficult for people to keep the insurance they have today.
Okay, something. How does Senator Reid pass that something? I mean, what are the sort of the procedural hurdles that your party faces in trying to stop that, and hurdles that he faces in trying to get it passed, and where do they put in public option if they want it?
Well, he has to take a bill across the floor of the Senate. Unless he uses something called reconciliation, which I don't think he'll use.
That's the nuclear option. What we refer to as, okay.
And it would create a bill that would look like Swiss cheese when it was finished, because so many procedural attacks would be viable against it. So he has to take a bill across the floor, which means he has to have 60 votes to pass the bill, and there are all sorts of amendments which would be subject to 60 votes points of order. So he has to keep the bill on the floor fairly benign. But once he gets it across the floor and sends it to conference, then...
Which means where they meet with the House?
Where they meet with the House. Then they can load it up with basically whatever they want. And you'll see it move very hard to the left. It'll follow the Pelosi model. Very strong, I would suspect, public plan, which leads to a single-payer system. Very expansive, very expensive. A lot of activity in it that empowers the trial lawyers, for example, as the House bill did. And then it comes back from the conference, and unlike when it first comes across the floor, when it comes back from the conference, it only requires there's only one 60-vote point of order, and final passage is a 51-vote event.
Well, how do you know that it won't hit a 60-vote hurdle at that point?
Well, I would hope that it would. If it ever got to, I hope it doesn't get to conference. But if it gets to conference and comes back from conference, I would hope that it would be stopped at that 60-vote point of order. But as a very practical matter, at that point, you've got a huge amount invested by the President and by the leaders of the Congress on the Democratic side of the aisle. So there's a real risk if they were to lose that bill for them. But it would be a benefit for the country.
Here's the thing that I don't get. Senator Reid is working on this bill. The Congressional Budget Office either has a number on his bill, or they're about to deliver it to him at some point. We don't get to see that.
Yeah.
Why don't we get to see that? If we pay for the CBO, we pay for the work, and we're supposed to have transparency, can't we see this number now?
Well, that's a super question. Why are they hiding this bill? I mean, why are they writing it behind closed doors, 4 or 5 people writing it? I mean, this is the most important piece of legislation I'm ever going to see in my career in the Congress. It affects 20% of our economy, everybody's life, and yet we're not going to be able to see this bill until it is put out on the desk with probably 72 hours of notice, and then it goes to a vote as to whether or not we should take it out.
Well, the CBO says they, quote, honor confidentiality if asked. I mean, I don't understand why anyone would want to ask that, because we really do want to know these numbers so that we can make reasoned judgment as citizens, as taxpayers, and I assume as a member of the U.S. Senate, you'd like to see it sooner rather than after the fact. Well,
I think the American people have a right to know what's going to happen to them, and they're not going to know.
But how about now, before it even gets any further? As long as you guys have the numbers, or the Democratic senators have the numbers, how about showing them now?
Well, they have a bill now somewhere. I mean, there is a bill somewhere that's being scored by CBO that you haven't seen, that I haven't seen, that almost every member of the Senate hasn't seen, and that no members of the press have seen.
Are there any sort of side bills, like payments to doctors or anybody else, that are sort of being carved out of this so that they can meet the threshold of 900? Because they have these side bills sometimes.
Well, let's use the House bill as an example here. That was alleged to be a $1 trillion bill. It wasn't a $1 trillion bill, because what they did in that bill was they took out the doctor payments and didn't pay for those. That's $300 billion right there.
So that wasn't considered in the bill cost.
And they put the income from that bill, the new taxes and the cuts to Medicare, they started those on day one, but they didn't start the expenditures in that bill till the 4th year. So they matched 6 years of expenditures against 10 years of income. So that's how they got to $1 trillion cost.
So we've been slicked on the numbers.
Oh yeah, it is the House bill is, if it's fully implemented, a $3 trillion growth in the size of federal spending.
All right, you may not be the right guy to ask on this, but how do you get away with playing those numbers games on us?
Well, you know, obviously they haven't with you. I mean, Greta, you are on top of it. I mean, you asked the right question. Where is the money? Where are the shells that we should be looking under? And one is the Dr. Six. The other is the fact that the first 10-year number is a fallacious number.
Well, I guess for the American people, I think they just want to know what's the real number and not what's the number that everyone's sort of hiding and playing with. I think
the real number in the House bill is not $1 trillion. It spends $3 trillion. The real number in the House bill isn't that it cuts Medicare by $500 billion. It cuts Medicare by $1 trillion in the second 10-year tranche, and it raises taxes by well over $1 trillion.
Senator, thank you. And of course, we'll be watching as this bill travels Capitol Hill. Thank you, sir.